Okay, let's unpack this. When we talk about decarbonizing the global economy, it's easy to focus on, Europe or North America. But what happens when you shift that lens to a region that's developing incredibly fast, is seriously energy constrained, and, well, has huge numbers of people without guaranteed energy access?
That shift is absolutely crucial because you're looking at maybe the toughest challenge in the whole energy transition. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the future of the SAARC region. It's the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Think India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, others. And our focus is laser sharp today. We're looking only at one key piece of research. It's a paper called Electricity System Based on 100% Renewable Energy for India and SAARC.
Wow. Okay, 100% renewables for that region. That sounds like a massive, almost utopian claim. I mean, it's such a diverse, complex area, huge territory, huge populations, and like you said, still wrestling with energy poverty.
It is a monumental vision, absolutely. And before we get into the nuts and bolts, the data, we need to set the stage a bit for you, the listener. First off, this study, it's a bit older now, it was published back in 2017. That's important context. And maybe more importantly, the way they approached it. The authors didn't try to model the messy step-by-step transition over decades, phasing out coal, building renewables piece by piece.
So none of the political headaches or the gradual ramp up.
Exactly. They used what's called an overnight study approach. They basically said, let's imagine it's 2030 right now. Is a 100% renewable system technically possible and financially viable in principle for that specific future year? Their goal was pretty clear. Could you design an affordable, reliable, zero-carbon or near-zero-carbon electricity system for the whole SAARC region?
Right, and the need for some kind of transition there is just undeniable. The region is so reliant on, well, old and polluting infrastructure.
It really is. At the time this study came out, something like 87% of the global energy supply, and that includes SAARC, was classed as non-sustainable. So this transition isn't just about hitting climate targets, it's fundamentally about development, about public health.
And a huge chunk of that reliance falls on the biggest player in the group, India. Fourth largest energy consumer globally, historically dominated by coal, lots of imported oil. And that creates this massive social challenge, too.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking huge human impacts. Back in 2014, there was still 240 million people in India alone who didn't have access to electricity. Think about that. Plus, you've got the local climate impacts of fossil fuels, terrible air quality in cities, potentially messing with the monsoon cycle, which is vital.
And here's the bit that the study really zeroes in on, the financial distortion. The authors estimated that just India's post-tax subsidies for coal, just coal, were around 196 billion US dollars back in 2015. That number is just staggering.
That figure, that huge financial weight towards coal, is really central to their argument. The researchers basically suggest, look, if you took away those massive subsidies and instead invested that money in building out renewables, India could potentially meet its climate and development goals much faster.
Of course, the political reality of trying to remove nearly $200 billion in subsidies, that's a whole different ballgame. You've got established industries, powerful interests. The renewable math might look good on paper, but...
That's always the real-world hurdle, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if you stick purely to the technical potential, SAARC has incredible renewable resources, loads of sun, great wind potential in many areas, bioenergy options, and just a huge amount of land. The raw ingredients for a clean system are definitely there. The question the study tackled was how you model putting them all together effectively.
Okay, so let's get into that. How did they actually build this model? How do you prove reliability for every single person in every corner of the region, every hour of the year? That sounds incredibly complex.
It's detailed work, for sure. They used an optimization model. They divided the entire SAARC region into 16 distinct subregions. India alone was split into 10 parts. And then they simulated the whole energy system on an hourly basis for the entire target year, 2030. That hourly resolution is key. It forces the model to make sure demand is met every single hour, which is crucial when you've got big seasonal swings like the monsoon season impacting solar output.
Right, you can't just average it out over the year. And the model looked at different ways of connecting these regions, didn't it? Using HVDC transmission.
Exactly. They explored this trade-off between sort of energy independence for each region versus sharing energy across wider areas. They set up 4 main scenarios based on how much high voltage, direct current HVDC grid connection there was.
Okay, what were they?
So you start with the most isolated one, the region-wide scenario. Here, each of those 16 subregions basically has to fend for itself, cover its own demand with its own resources, really decentralized. Then they moved up to the countrywide scenario. Now, regions within the same country, like the 10 in India, could share power.
Okay, makes sense. Then the big one.
Then the area-wide scenario. This is where they modeled full interconnection across all the SAARC countries. Power could flow freely across national borders wherever it was needed most. And finally, they added another layer, the integrated scenario. This took that fully connected area-wide grid and added in some large, flexible demands, things that could use electricity when it was abundant and cheap.
Flexible demands. What kind of things?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting with sector coupling. They modeled two big ones. Large-scale seawater reverse osmosis, SWRO, for desalination, producing fresh water, and also industrial gas production using power-to-gas, or PTG, technology, basically using electricity to create synthetic natural gas, SNG. The idea is these processes can ramp up or down, soaking up excess renewable power when it's available.
Okay, got it. And what were the main technologies the model actually ended up using to generate all this power? What did it pick as the winners?
Well, it leaned heavily on the most cost-effective and mature options at the time. So lots of solar PV, naturally, onshore wind power. It also utilized existing hydropower resources, both run-of-river and dams, and some bioenergy. And then for storage, to handle the ups and downs of solar and wind, it used a mix. Batteries, both grid-scale and smaller prosumer batteries. Pumped hydro storage, PHS. Also adiabatic compressed air energy storage, ACES, that's more for midterm storage, days or weeks. And that power-to-gas technology, which acts as very long-duration storage by creating SNG.
Right, so this is where it gets really interesting, the financials. After running all these complex models, what was the bottom line? Was this 100% renewable dream actually affordable, especially compared to the existing heavily subsidized fossil fuel system?
Yeah, the numbers are pretty compelling. The key metric they looked at is the levelized cost of electricity, the LCOE. That's basically the average price per unit of electricity over the whole lifetime of the generating plants. So in the first scenario, the most decentralized one, the region-wide setup, the LCOE came out at 71.6 euros per megawatt hour.
71.6, okay. And what happened when they modeled the fully connected grid, the area-wide scenario?
It dropped. The LCOE for the fully interconnected area-wide system was 67.2 euros per megawatt hour.
Wow. Okay, so just by building those HVDC connections across borders, letting regions share power, they knocked off, what, over 4 euros per megawatt hour?
That's right. The study really hammered this point home. Going from the decentralized region-wide to the centralized area-wide setup, the LCOE dropped by 6.1%, and the total annual cost of running the whole system dropped even more, by 6.9%. Why? Because building transmission lines, it turns out, is often cheaper than building massive amounts of localized energy storage everywhere. You move energy instead of storing it.
That is such a critical insight for policymakers, isn't it? It suggests that cooperation, investing in that cross-border infrastructure, gives you a direct, measurable financial payoff.
It really does seem to. And there was another benefit, too. The total amount of renewable generation capacity they needed to install also decreased by 12.1% in that interconnected scenario. Because if you can easily send solar power from a sunny spot to a cloudy spot hundreds of miles away via transmission, you don't need to build quite as much generation or storage in every single location just to meet its own peak demand.
Right, sharing smooths things out. And we need to put that number, 67.2 euros per megawatt, into a global perspective, because even using 2017 cost assumptions projected to 2030, that sounds pretty competitive.
It was, very much so. That LCOE range they found, roughly 67 to 72 euros per MWh, was significantly lower than the projected cost back then for other low-carbon options, especially thinking about Europe. For example, new nuclear power plants were often projected around 112 euros per MWh, and coal or natural gas plants fitted with carbon capture and storage, CCS, were estimated even higher, maybe 112 to 126 euros per MWh.
So the message from this particular modeling exercise was pretty stark. The lowest cost route to deep decarbonization, at least for this region, looked like it was through solar, wind, and those big interconnecting transmission lines, not nuclear, not CCS.
That was certainly the economic conclusion this 2017 study pointed towards.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into the tech mix. You said solar PV was dominant.
Oh, absolutely. It came out as the clear, least-cost renewable source for the region, with wind power following. In that optimal area-wide scenario, most of the solar capacity was modeled as PV, with single-axis trackers panels that follow the sun across the sky, plus some contribution from self-consumption solar, like rooftop panels.
And if solar is king, then batteries must be queen, right? You need them to cover the nighttime gap.
You inferred correctly. Batteries ended up providing the lion's share of the actual stored electricity discharged back to the grid, somewhere between 74% and 91%, depending on the scenario. They handle that crucial daily cycle, storing daytime sun for nighttime use.
But what about that midterm storage you mentioned? The adiabatic compressed air, ACES. How did building more grid connections affect the need for that? I imagine it would decrease it.
Decrease it. It practically eliminated it. The
Yeah.
change was really dramatic, and it underlines the economic power of that HVDC grid again. In the decentralized scenarios, where regions were more isolated, ACES played a noticeable role, storing energy for longer periods. But when the system became fully interconnected in the area-wide scenario, allowing power to flow freely across vast distances, the need for ACE's capacity plummeted by an incredible 99.8%.
99.8%. Wow, that's not just a decrease. That's basically saying you don't need it if the grid is strong enough. That feels like a major policy takeaway right there.
It strongly suggests that, for a region like SAARC with diverse resources spread out geographically, investing in robust cross-border transmission is likely far more cost-effective than investing heavily in domestic midterm storage technologies like ACEs. The transmission network effectively becomes the midterm storage by allowing you to access energy generated elsewhere, maybe days ago if you consider hydro reservoirs.
Transmission trumps storage for those longer durations. Makes sense. And the other big challenge, the elephant in the room for South Asia, the monsoon. How did a system so reliant on solar, and to some extent wind, cope with months of potentially heavy cloud cover and rain?
Yeah, the model had to grapple with that directly, and it found a kind of natural synergy. The study showed that during the main monsoon months, usually June to September, when solar radiation obviously dips quite a bit, there's often a corresponding increase in wind resources in many parts of the region. It's a natural balancing effect. So the boosted wind power, combined with the dispatchable power from hydro dams, effectively balanced the system and maintained reliability even with less sun. No major power failures predicted.
That's fascinating. The climate itself provides part of the solution. Okay, let's turn to that final, most complex scenario, the integrated scenario, where they added in desalination and industrial gas production.
Right, this was about testing sector coupling. They added these two huge new electricity demands, making fresh water with SWRO and making synthetic natural gas, SNG, for industry. And these weren't small additions. They required an extra 1,619 terawatt hours of electricity generation over the year. That meant installing hundreds of gigawatts more PV and wind capacity, roughly 491 gigawatt more PV and 449 gigawatt more wind.
Okay, wait. You add that much extra demand, build hundreds of gigawatts more generation. Surely that makes the whole system way more expensive.
Yeah.
But the LCOE figures you mentioned earlier suggested the interconnected scenarios were cheaper.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But this is the magic of flexible demand. By adding these large loads that could be turned on or off depending on electricity prices and availability, the overall system cost actually decreased by 5% compared to that initial high-cost, decentralized region-wide scenario, even though it was generating vastly more electricity overall.
So a system that produces more power, provides clean water and industrial fuel, ends up being cheaper per unit of energy. That's the real benefit of smart sector coupling then.
That's exactly it. Flexibility is the key. Think about it. On a really sunny, windy afternoon, instead of potentially having to curtail, basically waste some of that cheap renewable electricity because the grid can't take it all, the system could just divert that surplus power to run the desalination plants full tilt or crank up SNG production. This helps stabilize the grid, prevents waste, and makes sure you're getting maximum value out of your renewable investments.
And you mentioned the SNG production creates heat as well.
Yes, another useful byproduct. The modeling showed that this integrated scenario generated about 745 terawatt hours of usable heat over the year. This heat comes from the process of converting electricity to SNG, and also potentially from converting any electricity that absolutely had to be curtailed directly into heat. That heat could potentially be used to meet industrial heating demands, adding yet another layer of economic efficiency to the whole system.
Okay. So let's try and bring this all together. The main takeaway from this specific 2017 study, electricity system based on 100% renewable energy for India and SAARC, seems incredibly positive, almost disruptive.
It really does. The modeling provided, I think, quite strong technical and economic evidence, at least for the 2030 scenario they examined, that a 100% renewable electricity system for the whole SAARC region wasn't just feasible, but actually highly attractive. And crucially, it looked like it could be achieved at costs that were comparable to or even lower than other low-carbon options like new nuclear or CCS based on the projections at the time. Solar PV emerged as the powerhouse, the cheapest source, and that transnational HVDC grid connection. That was the key enabler for lowering overall cost by minimizing the need for expensive energy storage.
We should probably quickly mention the limitations they acknowledged, just for balance.
Absolutely. They were upfront about a couple of things. One was the cost of land, acquiring the vast areas needed for all that solar and wind, wasn't factored into their LCOE calculations. They argued it would likely be a minor part of the overall cost, but it wasn't included. And, as we said right at the start, it's important to remember this was an overnight study. It showed it was possible in 2030, but didn't map out the complex, probably politically difficult journey to 2030.
Right. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, thinking about global energy strategy? This paper, even being from 2017, essentially laid out an economic case suggesting that moving to 100% renewables in SAARC could actually be cheaper than sticking with the fossil fuel status quo, especially considering those huge subsidies.
Indeed. And that leads us to the final thought. This study, electricity system based on 100% renewable energy for India and SAARC, concluded that the modeled 100% renewable system could be cheaper than just the existing post-tax subsidies for coal in India at the time. So if the pure financial argument for making this switch for a rapid transition seemed compelling even back then, what are the non-financial, non-technical roadblocks? Is it political will? Is it resistance from entrenched fossil fuel interests? The sheer complexity of coordinating policy across multiple nations? What's really holding back the rapid execution of plans like these? That's maybe the question to ponder.